Okay, those of you that may not know who I am, I'm Amy Rutledge. I'm one of the biology instructors. And first and foremost, you need to know that I'm an ichthyologist, which means my background is learning and studying fish. So they are my first love. I love them a great deal. And I wanted to share a story with you that I heard when I was in undergraduate. And it kind of plays into an important event that happened at the end of my undergraduate career and the beginning of my graduate career that I'll tell you about. But before I can get into the story, the curious case of the fossil fish, I have to give you some background information. So, first things first. In the 1800s, 1839, a zoologist by the name of Agassiz was going around Europe looking through and examining fossil fishes from a variety of places. And he published his work. One of the published works was in 1839, and in that publication, he describes for the first time a fish that he dubs coelacanthus. Coelacanthus means hollow spine. The image you have up here is a drawing of his in that publication, and this is the spine, and it's hollow in this particular fish. It's kind of unusual in bony fishes. They have these weird trilobed tails, so it's something we hadn't seen before, gives it this new name. It does belong to a known group of fishes called the Sarcopterygians. Sarco means flesh, opterygian means fin, so these are the fleshy or lobed fin fishes. You may know of a lobed fin fish. Have you everybody heard of lungfish? Maybe in passing, maybe you don't know what they look like. Lungfish are the living members of this group. It's all we thought we had. Everybody else in the Sarcopterygians is extinct. We go on and discover more and more coelacanth fossils from everywhere. There is a good distribution of coelacanth fossils covering the entire globe, and they are from time frames about 400 million years ago to about 70 million years ago, and then they stop. There's no more in the fossil record at that time. What we think happened is 65 million years ago, there was the last fifth mass extinction. It is the one that occurred at the end of the Cretaceous period. It is the one you're familiar with that caused the last of the non-avian dinosaurs to go extinct. We never see it again. So we thought it was gone with the dinosaurs. This lady is a South African lady, Marjorie Courtenay-Latimer. She was born in East London, South Africa in 1907. And had a great love for nature. She was always out, walking the beaches, walking the fields, looking at everything, collecting specimens all the time. Her greatest love or dream was to become someone who works in a museum. She did not come from a wealthy family. Opportunities in South Africa weren't that great, so she had resigned herself to becoming a nurse. When she was early on in that path, a naturalist friend lets her know that they are opening a museum in East London and they're looking for a curator. She gets the position at the age of 24. She single-handedly, first off, goes in, sees the specimens, they're crap, gets rid of them, and starts replacing them with her own collection and collection of other family members. So in those activities, she meets quite a few people and gets people to donate stuff to the museum. This happens her entire life. She works at that museum collecting specimens. She becomes friends with this gentleman. This is J.L.B. Smith. He was a trained chemist. He taught at Rhodes University in Grahamstown, South Africa. But he, like some of us, had a great passion for fish. So in his spare time, he went and made observations, collected fish, and became quite well known in the field of ichthyology, and is now today considered one of the greatest South African ichthyologists of all time. In his lifetime, he became an honorary fish curator for a lot of the museums along the coast in South Africa. So they get a specimen in, they talk to Dr. Smith. He'd come in, he'd identify them for them, he'd help them set up their displays, that type of stuff. So, December 22nd, 1938. Marjorie is working in her museum. She is desperately trying to get a specimen, a display put together before the museum closes for the holidays. Gets a phone call, and from the doc, then they are saying, Captain Goosen, which is one of her longtime friends who has been providing her samples, he's come in with, I think they say, he's got 1.5 tons sharks for you to look through. She's like, oh, I've got to get this done. I still haven't even gotten through the last batch she brought me, but it was the holidays and they were friends, so she wanted to go down and wish them all well for the holiday season. So she goes down, takes her assistant, carries her little bag with her. Well, not so little bag. Goes down there, gets on the ship, and is digging through the pile of sharks and other fishes and gets to the bottom. And at the bottom, she finds a 5-foot-long, 1.5-meter fish, weighs 127 pounds, and it's nothing she has ever seen before. And she's like, this is special, I need to keep this. So they haul the fish off the boat, and the taxi that brought them is like, I don't think so, you're not putting that fish in this taxi. But she tells him, well, I hired you to come get this fish. You knew I was coming with a fish. So she finally persuades the taxi driver to take her back and her assistant to the museum. And, I went right past it. This is what she said. Let me read it to you before I move on. I picked away the layers of slime to reveal the most beautiful fish I had ever seen. It was 5 feet long, a pale mauve blue with faint flecks of whitish spots. It had an iridescent silver blue-green sheen all over. It was covered in hard scales, and it had 4 limb-like fins and a strange little puppy dog tail. It was such a beautiful fish, more like a big china ornament, but I didn't know what it was. This is a model found at the Smithsonian of the species she found. I'm not going to tell you any more about it, just keep this picture in your mind. I wanted to prove that this is in fact a beautiful fish, because the next picture I'm going to show you is terrible representation of the fish. But so she gets it back to the museum. She is desperate to try and save this fish. It is very, very big. At the time, the chemical we use to preserve fish is formalin. It was in very small supply in South Africa at the time. Only hospitals had it, and the hospital there in East London had very little. And the only other places that she could take the fish for it to get stored for cold storage was the mortuary and the local food storage facility. They both said, I don't think so. They refused to take the fish and store it for her, so she resorted to taking the small amount of formalin she had, wrapping the fish up and praying that it would last long enough so that she could get someone to come and help her identify it. Because she just knew those scales, those limbs, this was something new and different. She actually had the thought, this looks like a fossil fish. She had a teacher when she was younger that just drilled it into her. When you have those type of scales, you're an old fish. And so she just over and over was, this is something important. While everyone around her kept telling her, no, you're blowing this out of proportion. It's just a rock cod. We don't need to be dealing with this right now. She prevails and ends up enlisting a friend who is an amateur taxidermist. And he helps her try and find a way to preserve it. In the meantime, she's trying to find Dr. Smith. Dr. Smith can't be found because he is on holiday 350 miles away. So she can't get him by phone. She sends a telegram, can't get him by that, so she sends a letter. And in the letter, she describes what the fish looks like, saying, I don't know what this is, but I think it's something important. What do you think? He gets the letter on January 3rd. It was caught on, what was it, the 22nd of December. So we're kind of going along on time here. December 27, the fish starts leaking oil. That's an indicator that it's putrefying, it's decomposing. So like, we're gonna lose the whole thing if we don't do something drastic. So they decide to skin it, save all of the scales, and save the skeleton. They lost all of the soft tissues of that first fish, which was devastating, but at least they had the specimen, something of the specimen. Eventually, Smith gets a letter back. Actually, he sends a telegram, he sends a letter, then he sends another letter. After that first letter he received from her, he starts obsessing over this fish. It is in his ever-waking and dream moment, all the time, thinking about this fish. And he becomes convinced she's got a coelacanth. But coelacanths are supposed to be extinct. Not seen them anywhere, live, dead, nothing, for 70 million years. So, he continues to believe it, and I think it's like the second letter he writes her, he goes, it's a coelacanth, and I'm gonna name it. And he names it Latimeria. Latimeria after Marjorie Courtenay-Latimer. She gets the genus name. The specific epithet is named after the river mouth on which Captain Goosen collected it, so it's an indicator of where it was originally caught. He finally is able to make it back to East London in February. Walks in, takes a look at it, and he says a bunch of other stuff, but ultimately, there was not a shadow of a doubt, scale by scale, bone by bone, fin by fin. It was a true coelacanth. This is the specimen. This is why I showed you that other picture. This is a terrible photograph. And please remember, that fish went through quite a bit before they were actually able to preserve it. But this is the type specimen. It's the original specimen, and this is Marjorie Courtenay-Latimer behind it. And this is what went on display in the East London Museum. But they wanted more. Like I said, Dr. Smith becomes obsessive about the coelacanth. And wants to find more specimens. If we've got one, there's got to be more out there. So begins the search. He and Marjorie come up with this flyer, and his wife, Margaret Smith, who is very important in the process. They come up with this flyer. I've cut off the bottom. The flyer is written in Portuguese, English, and French. And I wanted to read, I don't know how well you can read it, but look carefully at this fish. It may bring you good fortune. Note the peculiar double tail and the fins. The only one ever saved for science was 5 feet long. Others may have been seen. If you have the good fortune to catch or find one, do not cut or clean it in any way, but get it whole at once to a cold storage or some responsible official and have them contact Dr. Smith. He and Margaret and Marjorie go up and down the eastern coast of the continent of Africa, giving these flyers to anybody who would take them, from South Africa to Mozambique to Tanzania. I think they even went as far as Kenya. And anybody who was willing to take them, they passed them on. They get Rhodes University to offer up a 100-pound bounty or reward for the first 2 specimens delivered to Dr. Smith. And any extras, they would probably be able to pay you for it as well. So this goes on for years, 14 to be exact. In, again, December 20th, holiday season, 1952, the second coelacanth specimen is brought in. In this case, it is caught on one of the Comore Islands. Comore Islands are in the Mozambique Channel. That is the channel of water between Madagascar and Mozambique on the continent of Africa, that space. And they're at the top of that channel. The fish is brought to a person named Eric Hunt. He met up with the Smiths at one point earlier in 1952. He was intrigued. He was kind of an adventurer. He was also a trader, and he had a trade route to the Comore Islands. And at the time, the Smiths were convinced they hadn't found it anywhere else. It had to be the one last location that they did not have the ability to get to, that most likely they could find more coelacanths, was the Comore Islands. And Eric Hunt had a route going to those islands. He delivered the pamphlets to the fishermen there, and he was the one that got the first fish. They brought it to him, and he secured it, called Dr. Smith. Again, it's holiday season, and it is in a remote part of the world that they can't get to. As a matter of fact, he finally gets a hold of the South African Prime Minister at the time, who then gives him a military plane to fly to the island to recover the fish. Except they don't know where the town is in the Comoro Islands, or if that town or that island has an airstrip to land. So they take off, they stop in Mozambique, they refuel, and they start heading that way. And they're like, okay, there's no airfield, we'll go to Madagascar, land there, take a boat to the island, get the fish, go back to Madagascar, and then fly back to South Africa. Luckily, the island had an airstrip. They saw it and was able to land. He was on the island for 3 hours, got the fish, was irritated that he had to be sociable with the local government. As a matter of fact, they made him talk to the local governor before he got to see the fish. It really pissed him off. He was not happy. All he wanted was the fish. So, there's the fish. I think I have the statistics on it on the other slide. This fish also caught at great depths. This one, and Dr. Smith is the one touching the fish. Off to the side is Eric Hunt, that is the trader that helped them. The gentleman in the white, I believe this is the French governor of that particular island, because the Comoro Islands, this is important, were a territory of the French government, or France. So it didn't have a dorsal fin, it had damage to its caudal fin, the tail, so he thinks, oh, this is a new species. Later on, he realizes he was wrong. It is, in fact, the same species as the first specimen, but he dubs this one Melania ingenue. Melania is after the South African Prime Minister, this is a little controversial if you know anything about, and I didn't know much about South African history, but that is the Prime Minister, Dr. Milan, that established apartheid. He is the one that got them that plane. They named that first one after him because of that. Apartheid was established by him and the party he belonged to while he was Prime Minister. The specific epithet is the name of the Comoro Island it was caught off of. He originally wanted to name it Huntai after Eric Hunt, but Hunt was concerned about the politics because Smith, a South African, was coming and taking a fish from a French territory. And they weren't quite sure that that was the right thing to do. So he was trying to smooth things over, name it after the island, make them feel better, and everything's fine. This is a map of the locations that we'll want us to show you where the Comoro Islands are. East London is way down near this tip of Africa continent. They're in South Africa. And actually that first specimen was further west along the coast, so they've been found from a variety of places. For years they try and search for more, but problem is the French own that island, and they're pissed, I mean pissed, that Smith took that fish. So they declare an edict in that year, next year, no one is allowed to touch the coelacanth, it belongs to France. No one but French scientists are allowed to look at it. No other foreign expeditions are allowed to come to the Comoro Islands to look for them. Only France. That lasts for 10 years, and at that point France has gotten enough coelacanth specimens to fill their taste for it, and they start giving them away to other places. Smith is not one of the ones they're willing to give them to. Eventually in the 70s, France gives up the territory, they become an independent country, and then they allow people to come back in. And further research goes on, many specimens are collected, but 1997, when I was in the last couple of years of my undergraduate career, exciting news. In September, in Indonesia, on the other side of the Indian Ocean, another coelacanth is spotted. A graduate student working on his PhD, walking through a fish market, sees an older gentleman pushing a cart with a fish. That's the picture you see right there. he's like, oh, that's a coelacanth. And then he's, are they supposed to be here? He couldn't quite remember. Maybe, but I don't know. But he didn't want to be alarmist. He's like, should I buy it? Should I not? He talks himself out of it. His wife, he's on honeymoon there. His wife talks him into, take a picture at least. That's what you see on the screen. He takes this picture. They leave, he goes back to California. Actually, they're getting ready to move to Indonesia in a month or two. Goes back to California. Turns out, yeah, that's a coelacanth, and no, we've never caught them in Indonesia before. Did not know they were there. So they're like, well, crap. So it starts another search. And in Indonesia, like in the Como Islands, the native fishermen knew about the fish. It was called Raja Lau, king of the sea. They didn't like fishing for it because it wasn't to them very edible, but they knew of it. And they were using the same fishing techniques that the fishermen in the Como Islands were using. So, long story short, a year later, July 30th, 1988, instead of taking Smith and Courtenay-Latimer's route of putting flyers out everywhere begging with a reward, he decides, I don't want to do that, because at this time now, lots of specimens of coelacanths have been collected and there's concern about their conservation in the Como Islands. So he's, I don't want to do that. I don't want to cause that show to happen. So he starts interviewing and asking pointed questions, and then those that seem to have the right answers and have an idea of what they're dealing with, they're the ones he goes, if you get this, I'll pay you for it. So ends up catching, or getting from a fisherman, a 66-pound female. She's just over 4 feet long. By the way, if you notice, I've got number CCC 175 listed here. The one before was 174. There is a group of individuals that keep track. Every single coelacanth that is caught is numbered, and there is a registry. We know where they are for the most part. So the 175th coelacanth is this one. He takes tissue samples, thankfully, before they get it into cold storage and wait to preserve it. Eventually does a DNA test in 1999. It's significantly different than the Como Island coelacanth. But he doesn't want to say it because he wants to get some double checks on morphology. In April of that same year, France, still salty over the coelacanth issue, a French-Indonesian research group jumps the gun, scoops him, and they get credit and they name the Indonesian coelacanth instead of Mark Erdman, who was the one who discovered it. It is named Latimeria, same genus because it is closely related, Menandoensis, which is named after Manado. It's one of the Indonesian islands that this one was caught off of. That is the gorgeous animal. That is CCC 175, that's that female. They had the chance of swimming with her for a while before she died. They're gorgeous. The Indonesian coelacanth is a browner color. The Como Island is a grayish color. And distribution we now have for them is this. That's where all they're located. And it looks like there's a possibility we may have a third one on the horizon. We don't know. But in the Indonesian area, they're finding more and more of them, and the possibility of some new species. So, super exciting. All of the information I got was from a specific book. If you're interested, it was published in 2000, so right at the perfect time for Erdman's discovery. It's called A Fish Caught in Time. It's a relatively short read. I recommend it if you're interested. There's a lot more drama and a lot more other things going on. So I recommend reading the book. So I'm sorry I went over a little. Any questions? No questions?
So why do you love this fish so much?
Oh, because we didn't know. I mean, this is a fish as big as a person. It is as big as a person, and we didn't know existed. The reason is the depths, huh?
Could a dinosaur come back maybe somewhere sometime?
Dinosaurs are still here. They're called birds. They're the ones that lived. They're amazing. We haven't found them. The main reason is the depth. You can't do a free dive in with basic scuba gear to see these. It requires a submersible or technical diving where you're doing like a mixed gas dive. And then you're at the limits of some of those mixed gas dives to see these. Yeah.
Amy, how old would these fish be? Like one that was caught in 1997. And then also, I assume they're not still breeding somewhere?
They are.
They are breeding.
There's still a lot of unknown about it. We estimate that they can live anywhere up to, there's been a variety of estimates, but probably the average would be 40 years. We believe that they don't mature until they reach 20 years. They're interesting in that they are what we call ovoviviparous. You and I, humans, were viviparous. We carry and bear live young. These fish also carry and bear live young, but they're different in that they have a yolk with each one of the embryos, so the mother gives them yolk. They're not deriving energy directly from mom. But apparently, it's still iffy because we haven't caught a lot of females with pups, but it could take several years of gestation before she gives birth to pups. And I think the numbers in embryos that they've seen in them, 175, this last female that I showed you, she had 3 eggs. And there was one of the Como Island, maybe, she had 26 pups that were almost fully developed, probably ready to be birthed. But I think only 1 or 2 have actually been observed in the wild, the actual young. We just don't know enough about them yet. Yeah. Any other questions? I could be up here all day long. All right, thank you.